Good afternoon again. My name is Siobhan Neary and I am an NICEC Fellow and also Head of the International Centre for Guidance Studies at the University of Derby. And I'm really pleased to welcome you here this afternoon to discuss with us the work that we've all been doing around addressing the potential impacts for service children resulting from their family circumstances. NICEC has been working with the Service Children's Progression Alliance for probably about 3 years or so now. And the work that we did, Kath's going to present to you in more detail shortly, was to explore and try and understand more about what the key issues are for service children in both primary and secondary schools in England. And as a result of that, a framework was developed that schools are starting to use. And we've also followed up that piece of work by exploring what the issues are for service children in Scotland and armed forces children in Scotland and service children in Wales, and also we're looking at Northern Ireland. I think one of the points here is that there is this is a very under-researched area. There is not a huge amount available, and it's an area that we need to look at in much more detail. What we're hoping to present to you this afternoon is some examples of some of the work that is currently happening in different parts of the country. So, sorry, I keep pressing the wrong button, which is good. Let's try that one. So the session, I'm just going to do a very brief welcome and introduction. And then my colleague Kath Lawrence from the Service Children's Progression Alliance is going to talk to you about the context really that young people find themselves in, and some of the impacts and implications of being in a service family, and how that influences young people's mental health, education, and also we've got quite a lot of evidence that it can negatively impact on progression routes. We've then got Alistair Ferrier from Skills Development Scotland. And Skills Development Scotland have done, are really focusing on this area of work and have armed forces champions working with the careers work as well as other areas of Skills Development Scotland to support this particular agenda. And then we've got Claudia Lasardi, who works as a manager for Study Hire, which is a Uni Connect hub, who again is working with and specifically developing projects to support service children. So what we're hoping to do in the hour or so that we've got is really to share with you a number of perspectives around what the issues are and some of the strategies that are being adopted. And I think for us in the career sector, we are all working with service children potentially, but we don't always know it. And I think this is one of the things that we're hoping we'll be able to do today, is to raise awareness as well as understanding of perhaps the unique experiences that service children have and the unique opportunities that they also have, as well as some of the challenges that they might have and how those might impact on their educational outcomes and their progression opportunities. So we will end the session with hopefully some group discussion if we have time, and then share some thoughts at the end. But I very much want to welcome you all and your thoughts. So just a few headlines, really, as I've already alluded to. There is actually limited data within the field about service children's educational progression, and it does vary across the four countries. Within England, there is Service Pupil Premium, which is specific funding that is available in schools to support all service children. But the levels of funding and the variation of funding differ across all the countries. So it is often quite difficult to make generalisations. But there's also a lack of consistency in terms of the data that is collected, who collects it and how it's used. Some of the research that has been done, much of it by McCulloch and Hall, who work at the University of Winchester, where the SCiP Alliance is based, and they've probably done more in this area than many others. And the research suggests some differentiation around educational attainment. So, for example, service children academically do better at GCSE level, but grades often drop off at A level, and there is a lack of consistency around their attainment. And I think there are potentially a number of reasons for that we'll probably discuss, many of which are connected to their mobility and their family circumstances. We also know that there are fewer children, service children, proportionally go to university than the general population, which again is one of the reasons why UniConnect have been involved in the service children hubs and are looking at developing strategies to actually target and support those young people in terms of their aspiration and progression. Some of the work that McCulloch and Hall have also presented is the parental rank that the parent holds can often impact as well on that progression. So some of the evidence they looked at suggested that non-commissioned officers' children were less likely to consider university as an outcome for them, but also were less likely to consider joining the military. Whereas senior commissioned officers and officers with rank, their children were more likely to attend university and also join the military. So there is some discrepancies in terms of the occupational gradings and ranks that individuals, that the families are engaged in, that will or may potentially impact on those progressions. Some of the research also suggests that there is a greater focus on pastoral support for service children in schools than there is for academic support. And I think some of the research, particularly that by Matthew Thorne, who has looked at career support, identified that young people, service children, didn't know where to go to get career support, and that schools are often less good at backfilling on educational gaps, and students are waiting sometimes for a long time to get into the school. So they often have quite significant gaps in their education, which can impact on their engagement, on their liking for education, and how they see themselves progressing through education. The research also suggests that there is not enough support to help these young people in making decisions post 16, and that often there is a loss of personal and ambition, and limited ambition to remain in education, often connected to mobilities and family separations. And as well as that, I think there are often, deficit views of military and family life that doesn't always, the external individuals don't always recognise and are able to celebrate the unique life experiences that many of these young people bring. So, very brief general introduction. I'm going to hand over now to my colleague Kath, who will tell us a bit more about the work that the Service Children's Progression Alliance is involved with.
Thank you, Siobhan. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kath Lawrence. I'm the Service Children's Progression Alliance Head of Operations. I manage the Alliance's programme of activity across the UK, the growth in scale and quality of support for service children's educational progression. And it's brilliant to have the opportunity to explore with you today how we can help you support service children's choices and progression. The Service Children's Progression Alliance helps practitioners, supports practitioners to help service children. So we bring together practitioners, researchers and policymakers across the UK. It's built on evidence. You know, Siobhan's already spoken about all the research that we've done with them, and I'll introduce the toolkit that came from that research in a little while. But we also work to influence the policy environment as well, so that people supporting service children have the tools to do so. I think you've all got access to the chat. Thank you for introducing yourselves, those of you that have. It'd be interesting to know who we've got here. Also, do you want to put in the chat, how many schools did you attend when you were a child? What was the longest period you had a parent or carer away from home? And have you personally, since you've grown up, have you had a major career change? So put that in the chat if you could. I think I can see the chat. I'll wait for those to come in and assume that people are probably thinking about it. I'm really boring. I just went to one primary, one secondary school. Yeah, 2 schools, 1.5 years, 1 secondary school. Lots of yeses about a major career change. It's not unusual for some service children to attend 8 or more schools. I've spoken to service children that have moved every single year as the whole family moves with the military postings. Separation from parents is frequently identified by service children and families as actually the biggest challenge, and by schools as well, actually. Submariners, for example, it may often be as long as 9 months with very limited contact. And then, yeah, leaving the military for civilian life is not a simple career change. It's a fundamental change of culture, change of identity for the whole family. Very often a physical move, loss of identity, loss of support networks, not just for the serving person, but for the spouse and the whole family as well. And there's really quite complex barriers to integrating back into civilian life. So between us today, we're going to help you understand a bit better the lives of service children and how to help them thrive in right through education, kind of despite and because of their unique experiences that Siobhan was touching on earlier. Yeah, no parental access. Thank you, everybody. The SCiP Alliance defines a service child as someone whose parent or carer serves in the regular armed forces or as a reservist, or has done at any point in the first 25 years of that person's life. For this, Siobhan said earlier, up to the age of 16, service children get service pupil premium. That's a bit more of a limited definition. It goes on for 6 years after a parent has left the military. But as far as we're concerned, that impact of all those different schools and separation and things carries on right through, and certainly through into FE and HE. And I just wanted to mention as well the Armed Forces Covenant, which kind of gives public bodies in general and the public in general kind of it's a promise that those who have served and their families are treated fairly. And there's a bill going through Parliament at the moment that will actually kind of make that much more of an obligation rather than just a kind of moral obligation. It will be a legal obligation on public bodies to make sure that, yeah, not only serving personnel, but their families as well are not disadvantaged. So I thought I'd mention that as well. Siobhan touched on the fact that they are everywhere, and probably most schools may well at some point have educated service children. On our website, I'll put the link in the chat afterwards, we've got a map, and you can go in and look at your local area. And this is based on service pupil premium data. And you can see service children are widely distributed. This is only England on this map. Sorry, Alistair, because it's service pupil premium data that it's based on. And there's concentrations in part of the country where the armed forces have a really strong base, but actually there's almost no local authorities. I think there's 2 local authorities that don't report having any service children. And this shows some of the figures underlying that. So There are 75,000 service children, and they're in 52% of schools across England, 3/4 of secondary schools. And people tend to think that it will only be schools near bases that need to worry about this. Actually, half of those schools that are claiming service pupil premium only have 1 or 2 service children. So it would be really easy for service children to be missed, and their complex lives that we'll go into in a minute to be misunderstood, and their talents underdeveloped and not recognised. This is a quote from an undergraduate that I spoke to a couple of years ago, and it's very revealing. Actually, I went to 6 different schools, 2 different colleges, so far only the 1 university, and it's quite interesting because a lot of undergraduates wouldn't say that. It shows quite a kind of transitory mindset, and a lot of service children that you talk to, they're used to just moving around and not staying very long and not committing. I just wanted to quickly show you the SCiP Alliance theory of change, and this again is on our website, partly because it gives quite a lot of detail about how we see the need and what we need to do in response. So it shows why we're taking the approach we are to addressing those needs. Service children, like all children, are individuals, they're unique, and they can benefit from their experiences but also be disadvantaged. So kind of in red on the left, you've kind of got the why of the SCiP Alliance, and it's got 2 parts: the need, the rationale for our existence, and then you go on to kind of the impact across on the right that we want to have. And the need, you've got the sort of 2 parts as well. Research shows that service children have huge potential and they can benefit, as Siobhan said, but then there's also elements of disadvantage and differential outcomes and experiences throughout their life course. And then the second part of that need, we did a consultation with schools and professionals, and that identified that people supporting service children, they mainly need to be better connected with each other, connected with evidence, and connected with resources and support. And if we go back and look at that little red bit, the need, in a bit more detail, we characterise their experiences as the 4 Ds. The diversity of experience, the recognition that service pupils are not a homogenous group. You can't make generalizations, and each service child will have a different experience of kind of the complex interplay of things we've spoken about: mobility through postings, parental deployment, separation, and some will see the serving parents transition out of the armed forces as well. Others might be managing vulnerabilities, additional learning needs, which is far more complex if you're constantly moving about. Young carers, the Children's Society recently found that was more common in armed forces families and less likely to be identified. They called them a hidden group within a hidden group. And that often families are quite isolated, away from other families that they might have made friends with before, away from their extended families. The second D stands for discontinuity. That's discontinuity in learning if they're moving about, in relationships with other children and with school staff, and in opportunities, the chance to join the Scouts or be in the football team because you've never quite been there long enough. Some may have a lot of that, some may have very minimal discontinuity, but overall service children may have had to work harder than their non-service peers for the same outcomes. Service children might have huge opportunities though for the development, there's the 3rd D, of strengths, adaptability and independence, but also the potential risk of disadvantage. The SCiP Alliance's strategy works from the premise that service children have huge potential, and we can support practitioners in maximising that. And I think careers guidance is a really big part of that. So I'm really pleased to be talking to you today so that we can try and help you to support you. This is from Siobhan, the research that Siobhan's team did that she mentioned at the beginning. Her team found low awareness, little tailored work to support service children in their unique situation in terms of careers guidance. And in fact, schools tend to answer the question about careers guidance by answering about their engagement with the military as a career option, rather than necessarily addressing service children's pathways and choices. So I'll very quickly introduce that work that we did with Siobhan and her team at NICEC and how it's really helped schools to start to think through how they support their service children. And Claudia and I were at a conference earlier this week where this research and the toolkit was constantly mentioned by schools as something that's really starting to help. So that initial research, it was funded by 6 UniConnect partnerships, and it's, as Siobhan said, it created this framework. And they did a literature review, they did a survey, and then some in-depth qualitative case studies with focus groups and interviews. And they spoke to service children, to the staff, to leadership, and there was a very careful thought about the balance of different schools that they went to. So numbers of service children from very high to very low, the different armed forces branches as well, because children's experiences are very different based on that, and different areas of the country, primary and secondary. And then they also had contributions from various specialists. And they spoke to policymakers from sort of key stakeholders as well, once they'd got the draft framework. And the feedback was very, very good. So we had the MOD, Ofsted, Department for Education, and they were all really, really positive about it. Ofsted said it chimes with their improvement framework. And overall, everybody kind of liked the way it was. It wasn't saying this is a list of things to do with service children. It was taking you on a journey about reflecting on your support. So it was really fantastic. And yeah, it was a fantastic thing to have this framework that takes account of that huge diversity of different experiences, service children, the different types of schools and the different contexts that they're in. And then we piloted it with various schools across the country, and they said what they also need is somewhere to go once they've done their kind of self-reflection through this framework. So we also, the team asked teachers and school staff what kind of resources they want, and based on that we've got a set on our website of animations and detailed PowerPoints, narrated PowerPoints with more information. So if you are interested in finding out a lot more detail, you can go onto our website and look for the Thriving Lives Toolkit, and there's a set of resources there with a lot more detail, a lot of the detail such as all the attainment statistics and things that Siobhan just touched on earlier. That's all in those PowerPoints. And these are the 7 principles that Siobhan's team came up with that schools have been finding really resonates with them. It seems to work, it fits with their experiences. And there are these 7 principles of effective support. And then below each of these, there are 6 self-reflection questions for the school to think about. So for example, under achievement, principle 3, the green principle, and it's all color-coded in the toolkit. Question 3.6 is, to what extent do you provide tailored career and decision-making support to service children? And then the school is prompted to note their evidence, to kind of rate themselves and think about what they're going to do. So I'd love questions later, and as I said, you can go and see all the details of that toolkit on our website as well. I'll put a link in the chat, and I'll hand over to Alistair now, but I'm looking forward to connecting with you in the discussion groups later. I'll put my email address in the chat as well, in case anyone's got any questions or thoughts. Do get in touch with me.
Thanks, Kath. Alistair, are you with us? Because I know you've been having some connectivity issue. Brilliant.
Hi, Siobhan. Can you hear me okay?
I can indeed. I can.
Oh, wonderful. My sound has been cutting out. I think it's to do with the storm. We seem to be in a bit of an eye of it just now. It's calmed down, but all around us it's a bit wild. It's heading your way, so keep your batten down your hatches, so to speak. I'm going to try and share my screen now. Oh, it's disabled. Host disabled attendee screen sharing. So I wonder if you could bring up my presentation, Siobhan, or if one of the team can.
I can bring it up. Let me just.
You should be able to share now. Sorry, I've made you co-host again.
All right, thank you. I shall do that. Yeah,
Thanks,
I can do that
Michael.
now. Okay, can you tell me when you can see my screen?
I think it's finding its way.
Is it trying?
We've got a blank screen at the moment, so
Okay, let me just try again.
If not, I can try.
Right, that should.
Oh, we can see
now.
you.
Excellent, excellent.
There we go.
Brilliant, excellent.
That's it.
Good afternoon or good evening, everyone. And thanks very much for having me along. I am experiencing audio difficulties, so if at any point I cut out or I become all Dalek, as I think the terminology is, then please somebody just try and get in touch and let me know. I'm really pleased to get this opportunity to come along and tell you about a wee bit about the work that we've been doing in SDS around developing our approach to the armed forces community, and in particular the children. And it's interesting that I think that we really need to consider that whole family unit. And I'll come on to that in a wee while, around, you know, if we think upon the parents as being key influencers in terms of career information and advice, and you know, and the experience they have of the system, the career system, and both the service and the military, which maybe doesn't equip them as well as an equivalent in civilian street. But I'll come on to that in a minute or two. So I'm Alistair Ferrier. I am a national executive, or national operations executive in our National Careers Information Advice and Guidance team. And I have a lead for the armed forces community. It's a post that I was doing for approximately 3 years on a 1-year secondment. So that tells you, you know, that we have put a significant investment into this, and I took up the post permanently in the summer. So, you know, this is a resource that we now have on a permanent basis. So to set the scene a little bit, approximately 400,000 to 600,000 people in Scotland are members of the armed forces community, and that includes serving personnel, veterans, spouses, partners and children. Geographically spread across the whole of Scotland, although we do have concentrations in Highland, in Angus and Arbroath, where the Royal Marines are based, Lookers and Fife, Forsyth. Over on the west coast we have Faslane, for the nuclear-based submarine base, and the Edinburgh Garrison area. But we do have family members and reservists and veterans across the whole of Scotland, and we would be quite safe, I think, in saying that there's likely in every high school in Scotland to have somebody who is a child from an armed forces family. We think there's approximately 11,000 children in Scotland who are members of the community, and that's ranging from early years right through to senior phase in secondary education. That's a best guess because the information is not gathered consistently, although there are steps being taken to address this, and that includes within our own customer recording system in SDS. And we know that across the UK there's approximately 2.4 million veterans, of which about 900,000 are of working age and also can access our services. So in Scotland, around 1,400 people exit the military every year and settle in Scotland, and that includes their families. Not all use the contracted provision, and we have issues with early service leavers. Now, early service leavers, for some of them, especially from the Army Foundation College at Harrogate, may be entitled to the next steps offered in Scotland. So some of these, you know, the younger service leavers may only be 16, 17 years old if they've been at the Foundation College at Harrogate and maybe not completed their training. Sometimes referred to by the Veterans Commission in Scotland as deferred school leavers, which is an interesting take on you know, the status that they have when they leave. For the serving military, the career support offered at the end of the journey, not at the beginning, so we're looking to address that. And we sometimes find that veterans' families can be unaware of support. So we're looking to maximise the partnership opportunities by working closely with partners in this sector, and that also includes the organisations that work with the children in schools. So where were we? November 2016 in SDS, we were notified that the Scotland's Veterans Commissioner was producing a report on employability and skills. 17 recommendations, 9 of which referenced directly or indirectly SDS. We had no networks in place. We had no specific focus on the armed forces community. We had no links to organisations at national level, no clear understanding of the issues and nature of service and for the families. It's quite interesting. We just assumed as an all-age service that anyone can access us at any time. without actually knowing that, in terms of, well, how do we know that people can access if they are new to Scotland, for example, have maybe never been through the Scottish education system, etc., etc. So flip that to where we are now. We have a network of armed forces champions within SDS. So we have each SDS region, we have a member of the regional management team who is an armed forces champion, and they provide that link from myself and the centre teams, if you like, through to the local centres and the local careers advisors in schools. We are a key member of the Scottish Government's Veterans Employability Strategic Group. We also attend and update the cross-party group at Holyrood, where there's one of the few cross-party groups where there's consensus around veterans and family issues. We have a dedicated resource now in our policy and professional practice team. That's myself, supported by the network. And we also placed the armed forces community work into our equalities team. And although not a protected characteristic as such, we do look and view the work we're doing with the armed forces community as very similar to the work with the protected characteristic groups. There's an argument that says, well, you know, there shouldn't be a protected characteristic because people choose to join the military, but the children and young people don't. They're just part of that community by default because of you know, mum or dad or whatever, you know, being part of that community. We now have well-established partnership arrangements, and we have dedicated resources both internally and externally for information, not only for our careers advisors working in school, out of school, but we have information on our internal system, our Connect system, which is, you know, is a whole section around the armed forces, which gives details of service, organisations, characteristics around service. We have an informal Yammer page, which we use for chat, just general issues and the more informal stuff around, you know, any events that are going on. And we also, on the My World of Work website, we created a dedicated landing page for the armed forces community. We did that under advisement from members of the armed forces. So we engaged with not only the veterans community, but with 39 Engineer Regiment based up at Kinloss, where we said to them, right, what do you think the page should look like? And they just, you know, told us to keep it simple. So that's what we've done with that just now. But we are looking to expand the information and the knowledge base, if you like, on the new My World of Work site, which will include, you know, a lot more information for those that are exiting the military and their families. Now, we know we already get the children in the schools to register and use My World of Work, so it's really just trying to get it from both ends, so from the school children right through to the adults, and that includes the spouses, partners who are maybe coming into Scotland with, you know, issues around qualifications, the difference in the frameworks between SCQF, RQF, and the various other professional qualifications that they may have. So the key partners, and this is the key partners we've engaged with, but the ones that want to concentrate on just now are Forces Children Scotland, formerly the Royal Caledonian Education Trust, as part of the SCiP Alliance in Scotland as well. So, you know, we work very closely there. The work with the Forces Children Scotland is really interesting because some of you may be aware that we've been doing a national review of the career services in Scotland, and we had a focus group for children from the armed forces community around you know, the changes and what they would like to get and see from a national career service. So we did, you know, we did have a focus group with them that Forces Children Scotland were you know, crucial, and they co-hosted that with us and also provided some valuable input into that. We've been working with the National Transitions Officer at the Association of Directors of Education in Scotland. So what we've been doing with them is working around the identification of the armed forces children within the schools. So we've had a wee pilot running just around identification. And the reason we've been doing that is that we know the issues that are experienced by the armed forces community, especially during times of operational deployment, if mum or dad's away, or you know, just if they're moving in posted to a new area or coming in from a different education system and all the other stuff around that. And what we want to do is make sure that we're having that discussion with school guidance teams around any additional support that might be required, and that could also help explain to an advisor if somebody doesn't turn up for their appointments or stops turning up. Maybe it's because maybe the parent who's been away is back on R&R for a week, so they're not in school. So it's really just around that, identifying the young people, so we can look to adjust our service offer and increase and maybe a bit more emphasis on working with them during times where there may be additional stresses on the family. It also highlights to the school that to make them more aware of their armed forces footprint, particularly so in areas where it's not a traditional barrack or garrison town, if you like. But initially we set up some markers on our customer support system where we identify if somebody's from an armed forces family. We had quite a low take up to start with, because the information isn't automatically shared through in Scotland through the data hub. We don't share this information from schools into the SDS system. However, we've been doing a wee manual exercise, and we've tripled the amount of markers that we had set over a 3-month period, from a low starting point, granted, but we've added an additional nearly 400 markers just over the last sort of 2-3 months, concentrating on 3 schools. So we're trying to improve and increase that rate all the time. And we have our data team now looking at an automated solution to this, so that the schools can, who use the SCiP system in Scotland for recording, can pull that information off, pass it to SDS, and we can upload it to our system. So it just means we're going to get a better picture and a better understanding of the numbers. And obviously that, coupled with other data sources such as census and the various surveys produced by the Scottish Government, should help us. Another really key partner in this is the military units themselves. So we work with the serving military. For example, in Highland, we have something called the Military Liaison Group, which is it's run by the local authority, education side, but it includes all the allied professionals working across the schools. So that includes SDS, it includes the health visitors, it includes social work, it includes the third sector, and crucially the military are part of that. So we meet, and it's really useful because we have information sharing protocols with them, so that if there's a deployment coming up, we get notified in advance, and it allows us to start setting the scene and start looking at our service offer to make sure that we're addressing the needs of the community. And we also work closely with the Tri-Service Family Federations. And again, an element of that is around access into the SDS services, reaching out to the families prior to moving into Scotland, so that we can inform them about the differences in the systems, the career system from Scotland to the other parts of the UK, or indeed from what they've maybe experienced education and career-wise if they've been serving abroad. So it's really just to try and again inform people about the service offer and the service entitlements, because the children are entitled to the career service in the schools. So when I mentioned earlier, I mentioned about the parents being the key influencers, and that's quite an interesting thing, because the promotion system within the military gives little or no experience of interviews or applications, and they're not exposed to this until they go through their career transition partnership provision. So how does that parent help that child if they're maybe looking to progress, looking to fill out applications, looking for interview skills? The work we've been doing with partners, I thought it'd be quite useful just now to talk about some of the common issues that we've encountered whilst working with the armed forces community. As we know, it's a very diverse community in itself. What I've found with the serving military is they have difficulty talking about what I did. I'm very focused on team goals. You may remember the advert for the British Army that's been on telly over the last few years, and it's all about the teamworks, and the guy sat in the pouring rain getting given a cup of tea of his
his mate, you know, so it's a sort of very much a team approach that they take. So they also have, especially the younger infantry soldiers, difficulties with the articulation of skills and how they can transfer these skills into the civilian labour market. A common thing is, I'm just a jock. So in Scotland, a jock is equivalent of a Tom or a Tommy, as you might know it elsewhere in the country. So, and they fail to recognise that the vast amount of skills that they actually bring with them. It's tremendous, huge amount of skills. And if you compare, for example, you know, if you look at a driving job in the infantry compared to a civilian equivalent, the additional skills that serving personnel will have is just amazing, you know, compared to what they can gain in civilian street. They can have a lower academic achievement rate. I was a bit shocked when I walked into an education centre in the north and the 7th timetable was on the wall, which I found a bit of a shock. Knowing their position in life, where and how do I fit? They're coming from a fairly male-dominated environment, although that is changing for the better. But there is that, how do you fit into civilian life and society? The promotion system gives no experience of interviews and applications, and they're not exposed to this until the CTP provision. This also has an impact on the children. If you think about it in terms of careers information and advice, where the children tend to gravitate to, and it will be towards their parents, the parents' experiences, what the parents have done. And if the parent doesn't have that experience, then you know the child is potentially losing out. The early service leavers, and particularly the young ones who potentially go to the apprenticeship college at Harrogate, if they fail to complete their training, they have their career aspirations and dreams ripped from them. And some of those younger people might only be 16, 17 years of age and eligible to access to other schemes in Scotland. There are issues around family issues around qualifications and how they transfer those qualifications, access to funding, complex rules. It can sometimes come down to where the serving person has sworn the oath of allegiance, and that can have a knock-on effect. With children in particular, we have many issues. It's not unusual for them, as we've already heard, to attend numerous schools. 14, 15 is not unusual, and all the things that go along with that: interrupted learning, changes to school and education systems. And one thing that really leapt out at myself was a quote from a young person from a military background was, "It's hard having to make a new best friend every 2 years." And I don't think we can really understate or underestimate the impact that has on children. But within the armed forces community, we know that they bring loyal, highly skilled, highly motivated, task-orientated, adaptable leaders. They bring meta skills in abundance. So we've been doing some work around personal resilience days, delivering future and skill sessions, and various other things. And we do offer a career guidance appointment to the serving community if they so wish. And we're trying to get to the parents, if you like, through the children in school as well. So making sure they're invited along to any parents webinars, etc., that we do around subject choices, or what your child can expect from SDS, etc., etc. So that's really about it. So thank you very much for listening.
And I think the work that you've been doing in Scotland, I think really, demonstrates and, shines a light on that need and that focus. And I know there's an interesting question in the chat from Jill Collins that we'll try and pick up on later. So Claudia, over to you, and hopefully the weather's not going to impact on you anywhere near as much.
No, in Oxford, I think we're fine. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. So yeah, my name's Claudia Lusardi, and I am the Outreach Hub and Communications Manager for Study Hire, and I'm going to talk quite briefly about what our work has involved in the last year with young people from armed forces families. So as a bit of background to Study Hire, what we actually do is aim to improve access to higher education in areas with typically low progression. We're one of 29 UniConnect partnerships across England, and our partnership works in Oxfordshire, Berkshire, Swindon and Buckinghamshire. with young people aged 13 to 18. We predominantly work with target schools, targeting students who live in areas where there is low progression to higher education. So it's postcode data that we use for the majority of our work, and that's how we target the young people, that's how we target the schools that we work with. And some of the things that we do involve mentoring. We deliver a range of workshops, not just about university as a pathway. We deliver workshops about apprenticeships, higher level apprenticeships, post 16 and post 18 options, all of that, as well as doing campus visits to different higher education institutions. So our work with service children has really developed in the last 18 months. We joined the SCiP Alliance Hub Network in approximately September 2020. We now co-lead the Oxfordshire and Central England Hub. Oxfordshire Local Authority is the lead, and we co-lead it alongside Oxford University. Since we set up the Hub Network, we've facilitated virtual Thriving Lives Toolkit training in June 2021, which was open and advertised to schools across our 4 regions. And one of the crucial things we've been able to do is develop stronger links with schools with a service child population. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about one of those programs. So from February to July 2021, you'll remember we were still in lockdown. It was really hard for schools and they had a lot to deal with, but we managed to deliver a pilot program to 1 secondary school with a high population of service children in Oxfordshire. We targeted a year 10 cohort. There are 15 young people in that year from an armed forces family background. And to begin with, we sent a questionnaire to the young people to identify some of their needs. And I won't go into huge depth to that questionnaire, but we then used the results to develop our programme of delivery. So the first thing that we did was deliver 3 virtual webinars. Again, this was at a stage when we weren't actually able to get into schools. And then really luckily in July, things were slowly opening up. We managed to take this group of 15 young people to visit one of our partner HEIs, Buckinghamshire University. And they had an on-campus event which typically involves having a tour, meeting student ambassadors from armed forces backgrounds, subject tasters, and workshops about alternate progression routes, things like that. Since then, for this academic year, we are developing that programme of support to extend it out. So we've taken the campus visits as the core, most successful part of the delivery from the pilot. I also think nobody particularly wants to go back to virtual delivery only anyway, especially not the majority of our schools at the minute. So trying to get some of those face-to-face events happening again. We are extending the campus visits to all schools in our 4 regions with a service child population. Based on the data from the SCiP Alliance mapping tool, there's 2,000 service children from year 7 to 11 in our region. So we will not be able to facilitate campus visits for all of those young people. Each HEI has a limited capacity because of COVID. So we're not going to be able to do something for everyone, but it's a good first step. The trips are fully funded, so we, Study Hire, provide the transport or pay for the transport. Lunch is provided for the events as well. So what we've managed to set up for this academic year is a different campus event at a different university for 4 different year groups. Year 9 will go to Oxford University in June. Year 10 should be at Oxford Brookes in February. Year 11 go to Reading in March, and year 12 go to Bucks New in March as well. One of the other things to just share, linked to a little bit what Alistair was saying earlier about a holistic approach and including parents, we have just been able to organise 2 events on one of the RAF bases in Oxfordshire for parents. So we have 2 one-hour workshops that are face-to-face on base. One is on Friday and one is Friday afterwards, where we'll be talking to parents about progression pathways for their for their children. So small steps in towards getting that holistic approach, but we're hoping that we'll be able to develop that further and based on the feedback from the parents, be able to deliver more and make it more tailored going forward. So a whistle-stop summary of everything we've managed to do. My email address is on there, so anyone's more than welcome to get in touch with me. And yeah, if you have any questions, please do just put them in the chat.
That's lovely. Thank you, Claudia, for that. That's really helpful to get an example of what's been of practical activities that are occurring. What we'd like to do now is, I know people are coming with different backgrounds to this topic area. So we'd like to just perhaps use maybe 10 minutes or 15 minutes of the time we've got. And I think one of the things that we don't know an awful lot about, and I'd be really interested with what Jill was saying in the chat about previous experience, is how can service children's needs be better met by career guidance? I think what a lot of the evidence is suggesting is that there are issues around progression, and obviously UniConnect are doing a lot. SCiP have a number of hubs across England that are working with UniConnect to try and target service children and support them in terms of progression opportunities. But as we're saying, you know, I'm a governor at a school and I know there's 2 service children in there, so a tiny number. And again, you know, we know that some children want to make others aware of their background, others don't. So there is a huge amount of individual experience. But I think there is an interesting question for us about, you know, what can career guidance do to be more proactive in supporting these students. Obviously there's work directly going on with that in Scotland at the moment. So Michael, if I could ask you, I think perhaps 3 groups is going to be enough. If you could divide us into 3 groups, we'll aim to be back for 15:15, and then we'll have an opportunity to discuss any items that have come out of our discussion, but also any questions that people have got for our presenters. Thank you. Everybody back? Thank you, that's great. It looks like I was going to say you've got Jill's background now of the library, because Jill had that earlier today. Hopefully that was a useful bit of time to sort of share your thoughts. So we've got probably just about 10 minutes left. So I'd be keen to get any thoughts from the groups. If you want to just, there's only a small group of us, so if you want to raise your hand, that might be the easiest way, or if you've got any questions for our speakers, that would be great. I've just realised I can't see everybody, I don't think, actually. Let's see if I can see any hands up. Any thoughts from the groups then? Thank you,
we
Jill.
had an interesting discussion about leveraging difference, and also the role of how difficult it is to articulate for anybody the role of your parents' job in your ideas about career, and how that's particularly acute for this group of young people.
Okay.
And then I realised that I'm a service child, and that completely blew my mind.
It is quite interesting because I discovered when I started doing this project that I was an ex-military wife as well, as was my colleague that worked with me, and she realised she was a service child and an ex-military wife. So we all have many labels that we don't always recognise. Jill, you put something really interesting there, and you talked about your travels in working with service children.
Me, Jill.
Jill. You, Jill. Sorry, you, Jill, rather than.
Sorry, yeah, I was sort of resisting the urge to say too much, although poor old Alistair and Jennifer got me chatting away as usual. But because it was sort of 25 years ago now, but my hunch is, and from what Alistair was saying in particular, and then the nods from Jennifer, things don't seem to have changed too much in that, the parental involvement was much higher when I worked in forces schools. So I worked in forces schools overseas in Hong Kong, Cyprus and Gibraltar, but also in Winchester and in Portsmouth and in the areas where there was a heavy sort of Navy presence. So often that the parents would come to careers interviews, for example, where that wouldn't happen with the sort of mainstream children. And I was quite nervous about that to start with, but I always found it very positive. Even if they didn't agree, sometimes the parents might have quite different ideas to the young person. But I could almost sense as well sometimes, especially with potentially the sort of lower ranks, and that sounds terrible, but them almost being relieved that they knew I had it, that I could do the guidance piece. They didn't have to do that because they didn't know about a lot of other kind of civvy street kind of jobs. And so it did really change the way that I worked with parents in interviews, because it was nearly always a positive experience, a positive input from them, and allowing them to see their children thinking things through differently to perhaps how they expected. So that was what my comment on the chat was about.
Thanks for that. I think that's really useful to just get that perspective. Was there any other comments that came out in the groups that you were in?
Do you mean generally? Not
just generally, yeah. Joe, do you want to say a bit about the project you're doing in Scotland at the moment? Because that sounds like something that people might be interested to learn more about.
No, happy to. So we've just established NHS Academy, and as part of that, a new work stream around widening access to careers in healthcare. And so one of the strands of that is around veterans and armed forces leavers. And because I also lead on youth employment and that strategy, I'm keen that we take an all family approach to this. So we're working in some huddles around new pilot for a new qualification for the senior phase in Scotland. And I'm just interested to see whether any of the schools that we're working with, in particularly in NHS Highland, might have some service children. Because I think, it'd be interesting to ask the schools to be considering their own demographics in this area. And then I'm just interested in what we as an academy can do through our youth academy to offer that support and work with, as Claudia was saying, work with education partners, maybe through some of our SCiP projects that we've got in Scotland. So as Scotland's biggest employer, what can we do is the question that I guess we're asking ourselves just now. And interested in kind of taking an evidence research-based approach to learning as we go. So yeah, I will definitely keep everybody posted on their progress.
We'd be really keen to hear about that. Just conscious of we're drawing towards the end of our time. Is there any other questions or observations or comments that anybody would like to make?
Can I just say, Siobhan, that if Joe, if you want to get in touch with me afterwards, I'm based in Highland, so I can get you access into information around numbers in schools and the schools. And also we work quite closely with our partners in NHS up in Highland as well. So quite happy to connect up if you like.
No, I think there's an invite coming your way for our development day in January, Alistair. So we've got a meeting next week to kick it all off, and then hopefully a larger gathering. So I will look forward to having that conversation with you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I love it when we can connect people. Wendy, you've got your little white hand flopping.
Just one bit of feedback from our group discussion. We were just starting to explore not just making other children, teachers and so on, more aware of the lives of service children, and the other way round. So making service children more aware of other people's working lives. But we were just starting to see it as a more reciprocal process, not just seeing knowledge of other people's jobs as a deficit for service children. Is that fair, Jill? Is that what we were talking about?
I think that, yeah.
And that's, you know, that might help everyone's career decision making, because most people outside the forces know very, very little about life in defence, and also the range of work in defence. It's a very complex sector to understand. So that's what we were just starting to get cracking on.
Thanks. Nigel's got his hand up, and then Janet.
Right, just a quick one from me. I wondered, having in mainstream HR, I've recruited a lot of ex-service people into roles in a number of organisations, and I wonder whether they are people who've actually been in the services, been demobbed and gone into Civvy Street, whether that is a group of people that could be tapped, if you like, into supporting, giving opportunities, or certainly experience or awareness to service children. So because they understand that they'll have a knowledge of how life is in the services, but also have made the transition, and I don't know whether there are organisations in the services that could actually foster that. That might be as a route.
Interest, definitely. Good. Janet, and then Alistair.
Yeah, I've been asking myself all evening, really, what is it that's different about these young people? And then I suddenly begin to think, actually, maybe what they are very helpfully doing is just highlighting, as an extreme version of something, they're highlighting the needs of all young people. It's just that they rather helpfully occupy this rather extreme position in terms of their identity and their extreme experience in terms of the particular insulated system that they grow up in. But actually, perhaps they're just telling us that these are the things that we could be offering all young people, a broader understanding of what goes on in the world of work, to disconnect them from the only thing that they know something about, to look at their strengths and to understand what some of the things are that constrain them. So it seems like they're giving us a really helpful insight, as perhaps extreme cases do in any kind of research, I suppose, as to what we could be doing for everybody.
Thank you. Alistair.
I just wanted to pick up on the point that Nigel made there. We've started looking at how we can develop those who are in their last 2 years of service into leaving the service as qualified guidance practitioners. So it's something we've started discussions with the military, the serving military themselves, and it's something we're going to take to the universities, because there is, we know that, if they're doing the part-time study, they can do it over the 2-year period up in Scotland. But we're looking at SDS perhaps providing that professional practice lead and maybe some mentoring and obviously placement as well, whilst they're still serving. So the idea would be that, somebody leaves the military in the ideal world, walks out of the military one day and walks out in the SDS and next day as a guidance practitioner. It's not always going to happen like that, we know, but it's an idea we've been developing over the last few months that we're hoping. We've got one person who's currently a sergeant, a staff sergeant, or a colour sergeant in the infantry, who's a career manager within the military, because they have career management officers within the military. And his role is around, it's a wee bit of sort of guidance type role that he has with these younger soldiers, and he's keen to develop that. So we're hoping that he'll maybe be a pilot for us in that sense, that we can maybe see if we can mentor him through it. But it depends on what happens in the world with service, and they could be sent off anywhere in the world at any point. And today's big announcements restructures the military a wee bit as well. So it was just to pick up on that point Nigel made, we are looking to people into the sector.
Interesting initiative. Cheers.
Thank you. Interestingly, when I trained many years ago as a careers advisor, I would say nearly a third of the people on my training course came from the armed forces, and were training as a careers advisor. Often they've been involved in recruitment and liked working with young people. So anyway, we have come to the end of our time. Can I thank all of our presenters, Kath, Alistair, Claudia, for sharing the work that they're doing. This is a really interesting and important area. We will be, we're finalising our research on the Thriving Lives kit in terms of the UK, and hopefully we'll be able to report on the next stage of that once we're there, which will probably be around spring next year, I think, Kath, isn't that's correct? So, but thank you all for your time and your contributions, and thank you all our participants as well. It's been a really interesting evening, and I hope we'll take a lot away from it back to our practice.